we were children. We legally and physically could not make the decision to put ourselves into that facility, but we were there and we had to do what we could. I think that a lot of people just look at us and go, bad kid, go away, or you did this, you deserve that.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another Fundy Fridays interview. Today, I'm going to get to tackle one of the things in the evangelical, conservative Christian space, I guess you'd say, that has eluded me for the longest time. And I want to address it because it's of vital importance that we do, particularly in the world we live in today, and that is the troubled teen industry. And to that end, today I have with us Lynn Green, a student from the University of Michigan who also happens to be at the cutting edge of research into this institution of American life. I don't know exactly what I'd call it, but that's what I'll start out for now. But either way, luckily, I don't have to be the expert today because Lynn will be our expert today. Lynn, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me.
And what I will say right now as a bit of a teaser is encapsulating all that this is
Yeah.
difficult in ways that's hard to describe. And so
Yeah.
I guess I would start my questioning by asking you to tell us a little bit about the Teen Challenge program, which is what we'll
Yeah.
be primarily focusing on today. Can you tell us what Teen Challenge is, and
Yeah.
maybe more broadly, how it fits into the larger troubled teen industry?
Yeah, so by itself, Teen Challenge is a religion-based treatment model for addiction with substance abuse specifically.
Teen Challenge started back in the 60s in New York City as a way for teens to get clean, but it's open to people 18 and older here in Maine.
Now, the program, which has operated in Maine for about 13 years, is deeply rooted in biblical teachings. Teen Challenge, as a nationwide program, claims to have a nearly 70% success rate of people staying sober after graduation.
But it can also overarch into behavioral issues, mental illness. For some, it can include just kind of behaviors that don't really fit into the social model of their family, whether that's homosexuality, what's deemed rebellious behavior for adolescents specifically. And then there's another side of it that is adults, where most of the time it's very similar issues, but that often has to do with legal trouble, substance abuse, getting into trouble with the law, things like that. So with the adolescent side, it's about, I think the last time I did some research on it, it was about 30 or so facilities all across the country that accept either, boys or girls. They're almost always separated entirely by gender. And these facilities will implement their version of what is typically known as like a 12-step program. So instead of a 12-step program for getting through addiction, it's similar to a 5-level system where you go in and you're starting at an entry point and you're eventually earning your way up into level 1, and then you work your way up to level 5 and you graduate the program basically. And so each level has kind of different guidelines and like expectations for what should be met. And that is the entirety of kind of what their treatment model looks like. And in there is discipline, there's very strict routines, there's sometimes physical separation in terms of private education online, and for some facilities it's actually like public education where they go to a public school but they're still in this like treatment program. And so it looks like a lot of different things depending on the individual facility, but all of those individual facilities have to fit themselves into a certain kind of spiritual and treatment framework to earn that Teen Challenge name, to be able to say that they are a part of this Teen Challenge corporation. Teen Challenge by itself is one really, really good example of what's well known as a therapeutic boarding school. That's what they call themselves most of the time. And that is what a lot of different troubled teen programs will also ascribe themselves to. One of the most well-known ones I can think of is maybe Paris Hilton, I think, went to like a therapeutic boarding school.
For years, I carried the pain of my experience in silence. As a teenager, my family, like so many others, was deceived by the promises of this industry. They truly believed they were sending me to an emotional growth boarding school that would help me. But instead, I was sent to facilities that caused unimaginable harm. I endured abuse no child should ever face. Abuse that was physical, sexual, emotional, and profoundly isolating. Like so many others, I was told to stay quiet, that no one would believe me, and that my voice didn't matter. This is the heartbreaking reality for families who are preyed upon and misled by this industry's deceptive marketing. But I've since learned that my voice does matter, and now I refuse to stay silent.
And then there is another side of it that's like military schools or wilderness camps. And so for us specifically, at least, wilderness camps was like a threat. It was like the thing that would happen if this program didn't work on you, basically. Then like they were gonna like recommend a wilderness program for you to go to, basically. So it's one small part of all of these other different kinds of facilities, basically.
Now, obviously, our audience is usually more up on these types of things, so I wouldn't be surprised if most of our audience even knew about Teen Challenge or these types of programs. But at the same time, one thing that I think is important to highlight right up front is that these organizations intentionally exist in the shadows. So if you don't know about them, do not be alarmed. They put a lot of money into making sure you don't know about them.
Things like these thrive on not being well known. Most of them are in the middle of nowhere, not in communication. They have very specific cultivated communities around them. And so they aren't really socially involved outside of those like very specific evangelical, often conservative, cultivated communities that they are in by like location, but also with whatever typically Assembly of God church they happen to be affiliated with that's in their area.
So it's an Assembly of God affiliate program?
That's what mine was.
Okay. Is that universal, or is there some
So
denominational wiggle there?
I think most of the time it's Assembly of God because there's
Okay.
some historical ties to just Assembly of God churches as a whole in Teen Challenge as a corporation. Just kind of historically, a lot of the ones that I know of are connected to either something very like the one that I went to is connected to a church like that. I don't think it technically has to be, but I think that a good amount of them find themselves in that realm, if that makes sense.
I'm excited to introduce Ron Brown, Executive Director of Teen Challenge of Southern California. Ron, could you share a little bit about your role and what drives your passion for the work of Teen Challenge and what they do, especially in changing lives through the power of the gospel?
Well, my passion is to see people set free from every chain of bondage and addiction and sin. When people come to Teen Challenge, they're burdened by so many things. And so my passion is to see people find Christ, be born again, and be transformed by the power of the Holy Spirit.
One thing I'm really excited about with having Lynn on is that Lynn is not only a researcher, but has been through a program of this type. I'm not going to get into specifics of your life story, but at the same time, you have truly the 360-degree look at this. You know, we talk a lot about how we're kind of outsiders in this world, and so we're coming in at that perspective. But you have been a participant, you have been a researcher, and so that brings an incredibly unique perspective to all of this.
And I think it helps my research a lot too. I don't think that I would get nearly as open and honest interviews in my research if I wasn't as well. But yeah, I have my own experience, and so I try and hold that and then my research somewhat like equal but separate, if that makes sense. Like kind of two different parts of me, but you know, all me.
And that also touches on something I wanted to ask, and this is just more of me being a bit of a research nerd, but I happen to know that this is, for those who don't know, this research falls squarely into the category of what we would call qualitative research. Interviews, discussions, not stuff that's easy to put numbers on. And unfortunately, oftentimes that ends up meaning that numbers in these studies are lower than you would expect from what are called quantitative studies, where you can get big 1,000-person data pool sets. Bless her heart, Lynn's one person. She can't interview 1,000 people unless you send out a survey, which doesn't give you nearly as much personal data. So I say this to ask a little bit more about your research process. How hard was it to find folks willing to talk about this, either from the student or from the employee side? And then just kind of, would you just, for our little research dweebs, we got a few of you, I know, can you tell us a little bit kind of the grunt work of finding these people, the shoe leather part of locating your participants, getting them to agree, and then conducting the interviews and finding out the data you needed to find. Walk us through that a little bit.
This is something where my experience becomes essential. I think it's kind of the cornerstone of how I'm able to do what I'm able to do. And that's both very helpful. It's also a burden in certain ways. And I'll get into that in like a second. I interview people who I knew in some shape or form, either through something called snowball sampling, which is where you interview one participant and you ask them to forward your information to other people who fall into that category who may be interested, and then they can reach out. So you're doing this recruitment over time, basically. And so all of these people that I've interviewed, I knew in some way or form were affiliated with that program because I either saw them there or I knew that, they were close to somebody who I had already interviewed. They got my information, they reached out to me, offered to do the interview. I don't think that they would have been as willing to interview with me if I wasn't a former student.
Yep.
I think it's kind of essential to people feeling comfortable with me, knowing that I won't judge them. I have things that I want to kind of guide the interview around, like questions I want to ask, but it really is just a conversation. For staff, it was kind of a difficult process a little bit. More people ask to be anonymous on that side, and I completely understand why, because they are either ashamed or worried about what their affiliation to that place means. They don't require convincing because I don't convince my participants. That wouldn't be ethical research if it was, but they take time and they think about it. And, sometimes they get back to me a couple weeks later and they're like, okay, I decided I want to interview. And I'm like, cool, amazing, let's do this. And I give them a consent form and stuff like that. And so that accumulated over time kind of naturally as more and more people were being given my information, because these social networks that are built from these facilities is one of the key things that students get out of this program. It's one of the only things that they know as good in their interviews. And so a lot of former students stay very, very close post-program. They are interconnected through social media. Some may even live together now as adults. We're very, very close to one another. So when I began my research process and I began looking for participants, it was not very difficult for me to find students who were willing to help me with this research and tell me, their experiences. So the burden part of that was my responsibility as a researcher to really break down why I was looking into this, what I wanted to ask, and what I wanted to gain from it. And I do a lot of work with several mentors at my university to constantly look at my data, constantly look at my questions to make sure that I am staying unbiased and really asking them about what their experience was and helping to give space for, yes, the bad that they may want to talk about, but also the good. Like if they were close with any staff members, if they really do truly feel that that program helped them in some way, shape, or form, I want that to be available in the space just as much as if they feel it was the worst thing that ever happened to them. And so throughout that process, it was a lot of the social networks that I had. And then it was a lot of work on my side with my mentors, consistently going back and redefining like what my questions are, making sure that I'm doing this slowly and that I'm taking the time I need in between for my own mental health, but also just to make sure that this research for me, I want/need it to be as good and as empirical and as founded as it possibly can be. And so for me, the biggest components of that is A, taking the time that I need to take with it, and B, separating myself from my own bias as much as I possibly can, and being able to recognize when it's starting to pop up and take the criticism if I'm not recognizing it, but other people are pointing it out to me.
And I'm actually just going to ask you, you may not know, and this is going to give you a scope of the situation we're dealing with here, y'all. I'm going to ask you at this point blank, and I mentioned this is for my own sanity. What is the actual name of this organization? Because I found no less than four names or affiliate organizations. I found Teen Challenge, Adult Teen Challenge, Global Teen Challenge, and World Challenge, which is affiliated but separate. What is the name of this organization?
I think So when I was there, it was adult and teen challenge. And then there is global teen challenge because it is a global organization. Like I, for example, had to do a mission trip when I was in the program. It was a requirement in order for us to graduate. And so they would like flip-flop locations every year. So when I first got there, they had just went to LA for their mission trip and they went to like a teen challenge in LA and stuff. When the time came for me to go on the mission trip, the location was Rwanda. And was an adult men's facility in Rwanda. And so we went on like a 2-week mission trip to that. And one professor that I've been connected with before for my research, he mainly studied adult men teen challenge facilities in Taiwan. So they are like a global corporate organization, but I don't know how factual it is because I'm also not very well versed in like tax codes and things like that. But like something I have noticed is that I do think the separation of like certain kinds of titles like that is somewhat intentional because there's different, I think it's like different kinds of corporations that they want to be, if that makes sense. Like a charity organization in like the US, versus like a global missionary organization is like two kind of different things.
And I thank you for clearing that up. And so I just say for reference to all of our viewers out there that as we refer to Teen Challenge, this is what we're referencing is this program and its web of affiliates, web of very empowered affiliates, which we'll get into a little bit later on. But even the primary organization itself actually almost defangs itself in a way that I think is trying to shirk a lot of responsibility. And I say that because another thing I noticed is it's very hard to find any names associated with the national org. There are two names I wanted to ask you about, though. The first being David Wilkerson. Is that a name you're familiar with? Tell me a little bit about David Wilkerson.
I practically know his whole life story at this point. He was the founder of Teen Challenge, I'm pretty certain. I learned all this when I was 14 as well, so forgive me if my memory does not. It's not solid still.
But folks, it's boiled down to one issue, one desire. It's more than wanting to be loved and appreciated or the cheers and the praises of man. It's more than being comfortable and knowing that you're secure in your old age. And you've got some retirement plan. So that means nothing. It comes down to this one issue. I want to be like Jesus. I want to see his face. And I want to be a reflection of who he is. Lord, when you said, seek my face, my heart said unto you, thy face, Lord, will I seek.
But yeah, I know this man's entire life story because when I was in that program, they taught us all of it. And actually, I think I remember there is a book that he published called something in
The Cross and the Switchblade.
Cross and the Switchblade. And I read that book. I remember I read that book because it was one of the only ones in our library that was actually interesting because it had like violence and like a gripping story. It was like the only thing that was somewhat interesting to read. But I read that book a lot.
I don't know much of what's going on around here, but I do know that some of you are so blind that you're heading for a ditch and you don't even know it. I've seen you walk around like you own the world. You don't even know how much danger you're really in. Now, you can't live too long around here on luck, because somebody can put a knife in your back in the next minute.
Hasn't there been enough killing and cutting? You can't tackle a horde of the toughest gangs in New York with a Bible. They're liable to crucify you.
I just want to say that there's somebody who cares about you people, cares about you very much. In fact, he loves you just like you are. When he died on that cross, he was a man like you. He had the same fears and the same feelings that you have. He felt pain just the way you feel pain.
And so I know he was in New York, basically, I think in the 1960s, and he was involved with or impacted a lot by the gang violence in the area, specifically with young boys. And he was already, like, by the time he was a saved evangelical Christian, by that point, he decided that he wanted to, like, go out into the streets and evangelicalize to like all of these kids and try and turn them towards Jesus and like turn them onto a better path in life. And that is inevitably what led him into opening one of the first Teen Challenge facilities in New York. And then that eventually, led into the amalgamation of what Teen Challenge is today. But he's like, yeah, he's one of the only well-known publicized figures by Teen Challenge intentionally, but he also did that, yeah, by choice, because he published a book about his entire life story and like how he founded Teen Challenge as well.
Well, and it's interesting to me because it's interesting hearing you describe that, because watching even in just, and I'll say, I knew I had an expert coming, so I only did a cursory couple of days of research just so I sounded smart enough to have this conversation. And even in the middle of that, I was like, they are very much deifying this man.
Oh yeah.
This man is very, very saintly to this organization. And that's one of those things that throws alarm bells to me right away, is like, you make the founder seem too cool, something's going on. So
50 years ago, a young preacher from rural Pennsylvania interrupted a high-profile murder trial in New York City. His mission was to share Jesus with the 7 indicted gang members. That encounter would change his life and the lives of thousands of others forever with the launch of Teen Challenge, a ministry that has helped thousands find freedom from the haunting grip of addiction.
I thought my life was over. I'll never make it to my 20th birthday.
Once a junkie, always a junkie.
I look at myself in the mirror and just feel sick.
If it wasn't for Teen Challenge, I wouldn't be alive today.
I would not be here today. I would be dead.
Teen Challenge actually saved my life.
Once I was blind, but now I see.
It's dramatic as day and night.
We've heard mothers say, I have my son back. I have my daughter back.
Children have their moms and dads again.
This is a place where miracles happen. And my family is one of those miracles.
Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation.
The other name I wanted to ask about was Jerry Nance. Is that a name you are familiar with?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Because also, this will become more clear.
Yes.
They're very isolated by state. I believe you know which state I was in. I'm very well versed in the people who are known for that association statewide.
Well, and I say all of this because because in my research, Dr. Jerry Nance, who is a figure I might talk a little bit more about, as I've seen online, he was the CEO of Global Teen Challenge, and he is as close as I could get to a national figurehead.
If you take the pain away, then they'll never learn. Wow. And you're taking all the pain as a dad and as a mom, and you're trying to take all the responsibility because you feel guilty that something you didn't do in your parenting skills, I did this or I could have done that. Yeah. And I've prayed this with hundreds of families. Mm-hmm. Lord, wherever they're at, make them miserable. Yeah. That's the prayer I pray. Right. Make them miserable in their life, and draw them back into where they know they've got to find help. Get them to a quick rock bottom, so that they know they need help, and then be willing to not enable them again, but get them and say, no, you can't come home. No, I'm not giving you money, but I will get you into this program, or I will help you get into this program. Yeah. That's what I'm willing to do.
Yeah. There were a lot of names being thrown around, but he was the one that rang out to me. And I want to say that because this should be already throwing some major alarm bells for all of our viewers, and that we have two people who have looked into this organization, one who's looked into it with great detail, one who has looked into it with cursory detail, and neither one of them can identify a head. Neither one of them can pick a leader. Your red flag factory should be turning on its lights, is what I'll say. So again, that's interesting to me. The very fact that that's not a name that rings for you, and it was one of the first I found, that's fascinating. That is just unbelievably interesting.
I know the state figureheads very well, but I don't know as much about the national office at all. In fact, I know one person who went from one of the state offices to the national office, but that's it.
And it seems like overall that national office is almost nothing of importance. Like, it's more just there to hand out the badges and not do a whole lot else.
In my facility, at least, when something really, really bad happened that did require someone bigger to step in, it was almost always the state office that was doing that, not really the national office.
Are you familiar with any of the legal requirements surrounding these agencies? Any of the laws they have to follow? Any formal protections that may be in place for the children there? And one thing I was very curious about, you may not know the answer to this, but this was one thing that read to me right away. Are the staff in these facilities considered mandated reporters?
Ooh, okay.
Let's start there and work
Yeah,
our way backwards.
there's a lot in that question, but I think I have some good answers in there. So the beginning part of the legal requirements around them, I believe, and this could have changed in the last couple of years, especially with all the political changes going on right now. What I believe to be the most true is that most of these facilities are registered largely as religious schools. So they don't necessarily receive state funding or federal funding in some cases, but that also means that they are somewhat exempt from the typical legal requirements of a drug rehabilitation facility. And what I mean by that is that they don't have to have a specific therapeutic, empirically based model of treatment. They don't have to have doctors, psychiatrists, therapists. They don't have to have any of that. They also don't have to have any social workers present. They don't have to have like any of that. Basically, they just have to have direct care staff, teachers, a nurse, and then some administrative staff on top of that, because it's technically a school, like a boarding school. But one interesting kind of part of that too is that I know for my family specifically is that legally it calls itself a boarding school, but your parents sign over their parental rights to these figures and to this staff when they admit you to this program. And, most of the contracts will probably say something along the lines of it's to make medical decisions, like if we can't get in contact with you and we need to get them to a hospital or something like that, like we need to have the power to make those decisions. But in reality, it's legally severing you from your parents, not only responsibility wise, but oversight and care. It's severing you physically and legally from them. It's fascinating because there has been very strictly carved out religious exemption laws in terms of like childcare and boarding schools that Teen Challenge was on the preface of. From my research specifically, if I remember right, when Bush was still governor of Texas in 2008, a Teen Challenge facility was under threat of shutdown. And that is around the time that Bush stepped in and carved out religious exemption laws in Texas. And then they slowly expanded to other states that allowed them to not have as much state oversight anymore. The second part about the staff is kind of an interesting part about it. I can't speak for every single facility, but I am very well versed in what the staff were like at my facility. Most of them, I don't think would consider themselves mandated reporters. In fact, I would go as far to say that they consider themselves kind of the opposite. Like they consider themselves obligated to report something internally, but not to police or social services. Most of the staff don't have prior direct care experience. They don't have clinical experience, social work experience, anything like that. I found it a while ago, and if you want it, I could send it to you, but it was like a LinkedIn job posting for a Teen Challenge, the one that I went to specifically, and this was like last year, and the only requirements to apply were a high school diploma, and a bachelor's was preferred but not required. And if they were an adult Teen Challenge graduate, they had to be graduated for 12 months before they could apply. And that was it. So most of my direct care staff fell into those bare minimum requirements. There was one person at my facility who was an administrator who had a psychiatry or therapeutic license, as far as I know, but I believe that it expired while they were in their position and they didn't renew it,
demonstrating how little it would have mattered in a setting like this. And that was one of the things that really caught me off guard. And actually, I'll be perfectly honest, Jen informed me of when we were speaking last night about the signing of parental rights, or the sign over. That is something that was remarkable to me. The idea that parental rights are signed over, and it's one of those things that they can tell you it makes sense. This is an episode that's not just for former participants, but people who maybe have kids, and these types of programs, they'll tell you it's standard procedure. It's not standard procedure, and it shouldn't be standard procedure. Oh, just before I move on, one thing I also noticed kind of going along with that is that many of these facilities, actually seemed like the lion's share of them, don't list public addresses. It's almost exclusively tied to P.O. boxes. They're hiding the facility location. And given how teens are often picked up from their homes to go to these facilities, there is a very real chance that a lot of these parents do not know where their kids actually physically are located.
That could be the case. Yeah, they do keep their addresses offline intentionally. I think their reasoning for that, similarly to the parental rights thing, is for the protection of the kids, to like not have some rando come to like where they are staying. For me specifically, my parents knew where the facility was. It's kind of a mixed bag for the people I know specifically, but I personally was not transported to this facility the way that other people were. My parents drove me. It was a very awkward, long car ride, but they did not go that route where somebody came in the middle of the night and, did that. I know that it was an option at my facility. Like if they felt that they wanted to, they could have, but they chose not to. For our facilities, it's kind of complicated, is the best way to put it. Yes and no, because as I'm thinking this through, getting to that facility is a very like complex, long drive with a lot of turns, but I still remember that drive to this day, if that makes sense, because I had to go back and forth so much. It is in the middle of nowhere, truly, like, so you would never find it just driving, if that makes sense. But for like my family specifically, they made it a point to visit me as often as they could. So they were making that drive pretty often. So they knew where it was. But they also couldn't just turn up any day of the week at any point in time. That was not acceptable. So they were allowed to see me and like know where I was and interact with me within the very specific guidelines of what the program said was okay. The interesting part about it is like we were in the middle of nowhere, yes. And so like for our protection, cool, great. The weird part about it was that for my facility specifically, the area we were in was like well known for child predators to live there because it was like so isolated and like far removed or something like that it was just like easy for them to like live there. And so it was like this double-sided coin of like we were surrounded by nothing, but like what we were surrounded with wasn't really safe. And then the second part of it was if you ran away, it was kind of like a threat over your head of like, this is what awaits you, like out there. Like there was a story that I had heard about a girl who ran away and like got kidnapped basically. And then they like literally the police like found her and brought her back to the facility. And that was like a horror story that they would tell us basically. That I was thinking about that earlier and I wanted to tell you about it because it was so insane.
No kidding. Oh my word. And I think it's interesting when you describe, because once again, exactly like you said, these things are all described as protection. We're protecting them from things that could happen. The only thing Teen Challenge seems to be bad at protecting its participants from is itself.
I don't know how it is at every single Teen Challenge program, but I will say what it was like at mine. If you turn 18 in the program, you are, a legal adult, you're allowed to leave, but they don't give you any of your stuff. They don't give you any money for a bus fare. They don't give you a phone call. They don't give you a cell phone. They don't give you any of your belongings. It's just whatever you have on your back out the door into the wilderness and like walk to town. People will like say to me sometimes is like, oh, if you're like 16, 17, why not just like wait it out and then you're 18, you can do what you want. You can do that, but nobody will know where you are because you're a legal adult now and they are not obligated to tell people of your whereabouts anymore and you have nothing. So what gamble really seems like, the most feasible choice about that? Because I think it feeds into kind of what we were talking about earlier with like what society says, or if it's really that bad, just leave when you're 18 or like, something like that. But these programs don't let it be an option.
I want to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about this level-based reward and punishment system. Now, it seemed like, at least in the research of yours that I read, that this was one of the few things that was pretty lockstep consistent across programs. Was this starting at level 0 or level 1 and working your way up to level 5 and being able to be moved up and down, and then likewise the existence of a punishment level, which existed independent of all those. It seemed to be that everyone was kind of using that language pretty similarly. So I would ask, is this a unique practice to Teen Challenge, or is this something we would see a lot across other non-affiliate programs too, this kind of graduation system?
I think that because it all does have roots in that 12-step program, that very like stereotypical thing. They have very similar historic roots and like similar people that was involved in creating those programs. And other troubled teen programs will have some kind of guardrail or like a not level in the same way, but same kind of thing that they want you to ascend to, some kind of goalpost. Like, we want to see this from you to indicate that behavioral change is occurring and our program is working. Teen Challenge and its level system, I think, is by this point an entirely separate beast by itself because it's so well established and practiced. It's just like one shade of many different forms that will often be utilized by these programs because, like I said, they want some, even if it's not empirical and it's not scientific, they want something that they can label as a measure of change that they can look at and say, you were here and now you're here.
That makes sense. And that I will get into a little bit about record keeping later on, but just to kind of get a view of it and to understand the situation at hand, you get a system best by seeing the end caps, I think. So let's talk a little bit about what I would call the level 0 experience and the level 5 experience.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about that level, that entry slash almost like, it almost kind of seems like you start out in the punishment level and work your way out of that.
A little bit.
So let's talk about that 0 to 1 level, either just starting at the facility or, God forbid, you did something they didn't like. And I can't stress enough, it's what they don't like. It has nothing to do with objectively causing problems or issues. It is very punitive. What is that experience like at the bottom of that chart?
I think the easiest way to encapsulate it for people who aren't familiar with it to understand is, in my papers at least, I call it the lower level experience. And it's that entry through level 1 and then level 2. So when you're in entry, what they grind into you all the time and what they say to your parents all the time is like, we want to basically break your child down into nothing and then build them back up again.
This month's Positively Jax Award goes to an organization that is breaking people down to build them back up. The Teen Challenge Center is a low-cost, faith-based residential program that helps people find freedom from addiction and other life-controlling issues.
And so that entry level is supposed to be, you have nothing. You have very limited privileges. And the way that it works is when you first get there, you are given what's called a buddy. And that buddy walks you through what the program looks like, what the rules are like, what, the daily routine is going to be like, just kind of everything, your day to day. And you aren't allowed to talk to any other students but your buddy for your first 3 days. This was just at my facility, at least. Yeah. So like there's some commonalities, but like every program might have different variations. But like for mine, at least, once you're off that 3-day, so this term will also come up a lot. It's called word fast. It basically just means shut up, like don't talk. It means silence. Like, so word fast means you can't talk to anybody else in this specific condition. For that first 3 days, you're on word fast from all the other students. You can't talk to anybody but your buddy and staff. Once you're off of that, you can talk to the other students, but you can't talk to that punishment level if anybody happens to be on it at that point in time. What it's called in the program is called D level. In the ranking in your brain, I would basically put like entry at 0, 1 through 5, and then D level is like -1 basically, but anybody can be put onto it at theoretically any time. Like, it's like that weird mix of like that, wow, that's so fucked up, but also like people like need to know like how fucked up that is. One of them was D level. The like kind of the specifics of D level, I think, is something that like it's like hard to understand because like even prisons, I haven't heard of doing some of the stuff that's on that level. But I think that it kind of encapsulates how much control these kids are under 24/7. When you're on D level, basically you are stripped of like all hygiene products except for deodorant and shampoo and like conditioner and like maybe toothpaste, I think. And you have to wear like the same 2 different sets of clothes like every single day. And so for normal D levels, it's like slacks or khakis and a shirt. And then if you run away, that's where that orange jumpsuit comes in, and they make you wear an orange jumpsuit and an ankle monitor. You're just stripped of everything, but even like basic human things that you didn't even think could be taken away from you. Like, you're not allowed to sit on the furniture anymore. You have to sit on the floor. You can't interact with entry-level students anymore. You have a different diet. Like, you can only eat a very disgusting diet, in my opinion, because it's like oatmeal, tuna sandwiches for lunch, Chef Boyardee ravioli for dinner, and it's that every single day. And you're on that for like a minimum of 30 days, I think. As well, when you're on that, your program progression freezes. You're not allowed to progress anymore into your levels. So like level 1 takes like 3 months, and let's say you're 2 months into it and then you're on D level for 30 days, you don't get that time back. That time is just lost. You have to start that last month again, basically, when you're off. It's like one of the cornerstones of like control used over these kids, because D level is like the worst thing that can happen to you in that program. So once you're off and you're an entry and you're just kind of hanging out, you can start to get to know people a little bit. This is where some of the differences and my research kind of start to come in a little bit. But as a girl in that program, the biggest thing is makeup, things to make yourself look and feel pretty. So when you're an entry, you have none, basically. You only have foundation and that's it. And so when you're an entry level, you're wearing the uniforms, which is just like color coded clothes, like black and gray sweatpants and stuff like that, or like jeans and the polo for school and stuff. So you're in uniform all the time. You can't have any makeup. You probably can't have your hair products that you normally use either. So you're kind of going through this very big environmental change, for me at least. But also, the best way to put it is everything around me sucks and I hate the way I look. And like that's like in 14-year-old girl brain, that is the easiest way to put how it feels. And so when you're kind of immediately put into that place of just like deprivation, like just what I don't have, like these things that I had access to a week ago, I don't have anymore. Cell phone gone, makeup gone, ability to wear what I want, do what I want, wake up when I want, gone. So you're kind of going through, at least for me, it was like this weird grieving process in that beginning part of everything you don't have. And so for some people, you kind of get to like that point where you're accepting it. And for some people, they just kind of lose their minds and like are not happy about it. They scream, they yell, whatever. For me, I just kind of like very quickly shut down and kind of accepted the situation, if that makes sense, because it's such a big shift from what you had to the situation that you're in. The only thing I can really liken it to for people to kind of understand how drastic it feels is prison. Like going to prison when you had never been there before is like everything that you took for granted that you could do, you can't do anymore. And that is kind of like all that the entry level experience is. And so when you finally make it to that first level, you start to get things back for the first time. You get one day out of the week where you can wear what clothes you want to wear again. Modest, of course, but like whatever clothes you want that have been improved. You get, I think it's blush and mascara in your makeup collection. You get maybe one extra hair tool. Like you get some things back. So in that first level, you really are kind of being broken down in the way where you're just thinking about all these things that you don't have, and simultaneously having all these new rules and routine put onto you. And so the second that they kind of see you adapting to that and like almost letting it happen or just like accepting it, they reward you, where it's like, okay, here's that first level. Because when you also get to that first level, Friday and Saturday nights would be like our big nights because you could watch a movie and eat snacks. So when you make that first level, you also get to eat snacks and, you know, watch movies and stuff like that. So it's just this culmination of being able to gather like more and more things. And so level one's like that first taste of like, oh, I have some of these things back again.
And so then we'll jump, because we don't need to delineate each level here. So let's kind of jump to the level 5 experience, the top end, because I thought that was interesting. Naturally, you'd kind of think best is how I would look at it. Like, oh, level 5, it's the best, everything. And yet one thing I really liked about the work you sent to me is that you highlighted that level 5 has its own unique challenges too. And the way I would describe it, you can tell me if I'm off or not, but it seemed to kind of put the kids who got all the way up there into this weird combo role that I wrote in my notes was the mentor snitch.
Yeah.
And the idea being that you're both expected to take care of the new kids. You're a buddy. The buddies are usually higher up the system. And so you're expected to not only be taking care of them, supporting them, getting them into the program, but you're also supposed to be kind of like the chief rat for the staff, and you're expected to tell on them and tell anything they tell you, meaning that you kind of have to undermine that. I just thought it was such a strange, and it's one of those counterintuitive roles kind of on its face. You want the level 5s, who are your most trusted, most engaged kids, to also be the ones who are effectively, you're also telling them, hey, you're going to have to break the other kids' trust as part of your graduation process. And I was just very intrigued by that level 5 experience as well. And can you speak to a little more about that?
It's little seeds along the way, you know. It's so fascinating because it's not like they give you, because we would have wristbands that would indicate what level we were at, and they were color coded per level. So it's not like they handed you your level 5 wristband and was like, okay, now tell me every single thing the girls are doing. But it was little seeds along the way. So like that upper versus lower level distinction that I mentioned, when you're an upper level now, like level 3, the easiest way to put it is collective punishment was a thing. If they found out that you knew about something and you did not say anything or you participated in it, you were just as guilty as the person who did it. And so when you're a level 3 or 4, they expect you to not be letting that stuff slide around you. They expect you to hold those people accountable to the rules. And so by the time you are a level 5, they have ultimate trust in you, basically, because you have established to that point that you are willing to enforce the rules when nobody is watching. That's like the key distinction almost, because when you're a level 5, you're like on par with an intern level staff member. They leave you with the rest of the students if a staff member has to go do something and they can't keep an eye on them. You know, you're a buddy for other students who are new. You're explaining the rules. If somebody does something in front of you and you do not say something and you are a level 5, you could be at risk of having your level dropped because they do not expect that behavior out of somebody who supposedly is supposed to be so gung-ho for the rules that they are willing to constantly keep it going, not only just when they get that reward, that level 5, but they have well established that they are willing to do it before they even get to that point. But when you're a level 5, you have everything back. You have all of your makeup. It was the only level where you could wear eyeliner and lipstick. You can wear what you want every single day of the week. You don't have to wear uniforms anymore. You can watch movies every single night, eat snacks every single night, call who you want to call that's on your approved list every day. You get all of these things back. So it's almost on the cusp of just being a normal teenager again, basically. They have like slowly added these privileges on over time. And so you're conditioned in so many different ways. You're conditioned not only to enforce it when nobody's watching, but to protect yourself. But also for some, I go back and forth on whether or not it was fully internalized in me because I made it all the way to level 5 at one point. I could never really distinguish in myself if I was doing it to protect what I had earned at that point or for the sanctity of the program, because I really cared about the rules. Like I said, I go back and forth on that, but at least for me, level 5 was like, I have earned all of this shit. I cannot lose it, basically.
And I think it's interesting, coming from a little bit of a sports background myself, I think of the concept of the player coach at level 5, where you're still playing the game. You're still the rules still apply to you. It's just you have a different role in regards to those rules and more freedom. And that leads in really well to kind of my next question here that I want to talk about, which goes more directly into your research. Now, I will tell everyone for our viewers here that this is pre-publication research. It's still in editing and things like that. And conclusions change as new data comes in. So we're operating with what we have right now. Again, I cannot stress enough, there is not a great deal of research on this in general. And Lynn is at the forefront. Lynn is on the razor's edge of something I think is going to be a much bigger deal in the next 10 years or so. But to that end, one of the themes of your research, or I would argue the central theme of your research, was this concept of playing the game.
Yeah.
And that may be obvious, or it may seem obvious to people out there watching, but even to me, I read like, oh yeah, playing the game, obviously. At the same time, your breakdown of what that was and what it means in the context of Teen Challenge and how it's different than just, go along to get along, it was fascinating. And it also seemed like your research participants were using this exact same language. Yeah. And so Tell me a little bit about what you discovered about the concept of playing the game in Teen Challenge.
I don't think I'll ever forget that moment, to be honest. Like, because just like you said, it feels so obvious, especially for somebody like me who had been through it. Like, it was always there, but I just finally had the words for it. But that term or something very akin to it, very similar to it, came up in every single one of my interviews without fail. It was brought up in the very first interview. That was the terminology that my participants said. It came up in every single interview afterwards, in some shape or form. But it was this process of a journey across this 5-level system for these students where they kind of reach this path where it diverges into 2 different outcomes that can happen. You kind of reach this point where you're like, okay, I could either keep fighting, I could try and convince my parents to pull me out, which for a lot of kids is nearly impossible to convince your parents to do that. And often if you try and rebel more by that point, it just leads into more traumatization, which we can get into later, but with things like D-level and stuff like that. And so a lot of kids hit this point where you're just kind of broken down by that point, and you realize like the only way I can get out of this is if I replicate the behavior that they want to see. Whether I fully believe in it or not doesn't really matter by that point. You know, maybe some do, maybe some don't, maybe some just believe it in the moment because that's kind of what they have to tell themselves to get through it. But it's just like this internal switch that kind of goes off in almost every single one of these kids' heads where they just get it. And they're just like, this is what I have to do. And they do it. They exhibit the behavior that they think the staff want to see. They tell on other students. They follow the rules. They don't get disciplined often. You know, they're exhibiting the behavior that they want to see. And then there's this other side of it as well, where there's this internal spirituality side of it that they're trying to exhibit because it's a Christian evangelical program. There's a lot of visual spirituality that people like to do in those churches. So at the same time where you're trying to show that you are conforming to this program in the way that they want to see, they would constantly say that you don't have to be a Christian to graduate that program. I never saw a single student graduate that program not being a Christian. I was there for 15 months and I did not see it a single time. So by the time you are a level 4 or 5, not only have you fully started like playing the game, quote unquote, but you have also become this like spiritual person and spiritual enforcer. Like you are guiding other people spiritually. You're praying for other people. You know, maybe you're getting really emotional during like worship or something like that. Like you're exhibiting all of these spiritual things. And so like not only are these kids having to make very conscious or subconscious decisions to do what they need to do to leave, there's like this whole other part of it where it's now I have to take on this entire spiritual identity that I may or may not fully align with or even understand, but now that's just part of what I have to do. So I'm going to do it.
But
Yeah.
I thought it was so interesting because at the same time, and again, another piece of your research that I love is that you took the time to not only reach out to folks who had gone through the program as participants, but also staff. And we'll come to find out there's a lot of overlap there. But at the same time, I want to ask from the staff side.
Yeah.
Do you think the staff are aware that they're teaching these kids to kind of play the game and conform to the structure around them? Or do you think that there is, I don't want to say mass delusion, but I'm going to kind of say this idea running through the staff that we're actually helping them and they really do believe these things? Do you think they're cognizant of what they're teaching these kids to actually do? Or do they like the conformity? Or have they deluded themselves into thinking they're actually creating these perfect whole beings they claim to be able to create?
You know, I'm honestly really glad that it was broken up into 2 questions because it's so fascinating just how it like works together. Like not only like kind of being a kid and seeing it, but also as a researcher looking back on it too. I think this is the best way to put it, is that a lot of the staff are partly convinced that they are doing something good, but I think a majority of them are so occupied with playing their own game that they can't even separate themselves enough to think about that. Because as much as the students are expected to adhere to these like rules and cultural expectations, the staff just as much are expected to do that. But they have this whole other internal job hierarchy and income aspect of it that is an entirely separate world in itself. So I think that some staff do key on to the idea that like, oh, this student is just faking it. But a lot of the staff truly do believe that they can tell when a student's faking it and that they can tell when real change happens and that they are doing something good. To be honest, it was a really hard choice for me to choose to interview staff because at the beginning I really didn't want to, but I kind of realized very quickly it was necessary. And every single staff member I interviewed no longer works there. One person is still like socially affiliated with it and they choose to, but they don't choose to work there anymore. So every single staff member I had interviewed, except for that one person, apologized to me in some shape or form for their participation in that program or exhibited some kind of guilt for that program. You know, some staff akin it to walking away from an abusive relationship. Some made it feel similar to walking away from a cult, but it sounded and seemed like there was just such this internal pressure and hierarchy that they had to adhere to all the time that their job was just go, 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 you know, fall in line, do what's expected, keep the kids in line, don't do much other than that.
And this is kind of some of the tricky, the pitfalls of qualitative research is that in this situation, I think it's very unique for you in that your personal experience probably helped you with half of your research participants and hurt you with the other half.
Yeah.
Because invariably in these types of situations, and I don't want to get into, one thing we're really not trying to do today is to get into the really graphic abuses of these programs. What I'm hoping is that by showing you all the pitfalls in the very structure of how it works, you'll see where the abuses can happen. And then I just want you to know wherever the abuses can happen, they are happening. And so that's why we're fighting this stuff. But at the same time, it puts you in a situation where I expect, like you said, that former participants, oh, she's like us. She's one of us. She's going to understand what we're talking about. And we want to engage with her because she's like us. She knows what it is. Whereas staff are going to go, what are you trying to get out of this?
Yeah.
What do you want? What are you trying to make me look like? And again, a big part of that is because they split responsibility. It's nobody's actually responsible for anything. Well, I didn't do that. Well, I didn't do. Well, you all participated a little bit. And if we're going to do the collective punishment thing, it might as well be blown back on the staff too.
I think it's hard for anyone to really go through a process of realizing that they either participated in harm in any way or condoned. Like it's difficult for, I think, the human brain to do that no matter what. I think that this just gives it a very kind of nicely carved out excuse for some people.
Shifting gears a tiny bit, one of the things that I'd like to talk a little bit about, we addressed this in the beginning a little bit, but I want to let you all know just the sheer scope of the problem we're dealing with here when it comes to the decentralization of Teen Challenge. I have never seen an organization that has spread itself out so aggressively to its chapter members while almost actively defanging its own central hub, its own national headquarters. And the one organization that it reminded me of most actively, and I'm not joking when I say this, is the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. In that there is a national organization, but the power is delineated to smaller groups. And they don't always look or sound the same. Just to give you an idea, and I'm going to read this to you because it's fun, here's a list of official Teen Challenge website-based programs and what they're named. So some of the names of the programs I found were the Adult and Teen Challenge of Central and Southwest Missouri, which also conveniently went by Adult and Teen Challenge Primrose Hill, 2 names. The Sunrise, SON, Adult and Teen Challenge of Cache, Oklahoma.
I know Sunrise, yeah.
But it gets even stranger because another one I found was the Kansas City Girls Academy, which I had to dig way down on the bottom of their website to even find their Teen Challenge affiliate badge. They were actively hiding it, in my opinion. Likewise, the Hoving Home of Garrison, New York, or the Thrive Girls Academy. Oh, I also wanted to read this one to you because I found some videos on their website. This was my favorite name of any of these programs I found. This is the full name. The Tri-State Teen Challenge International Re-Entry Housing of the Queen City. That's their full name.
That's insane. I actually don't, I can't even like try and articulate where that one could even be located either.
Jen said it was a Fall Out Boy song. I mean, it probably is obvious in some regards that they're shirking responsibility a little bit as a centralized structure. And here's the thing. If you Google Teen Challenge controversy, one thing I noticed is that almost every individual branch has its own controversies, and those little problems stay isolated. Nobody is talking about the Teen Challenge structure because they're too busy talking about their program.
Yeah, I saw that. I am struggling to find the words for it. I am going to be limited in how much I speak of it because it's not my story.
Of
but
course.
I want the overall context there because it's that there was an individual who was in a very high level position at my facility that involved themselves inappropriately with somebody else that was unable to consent, not able to consent at that time, who was underage. That is what I was saying earlier with that's when that office steps in, the state level office.
The state office, not the national.
No.
The national is almost never brought in.
And so when word got out about it and it started blowing up a lot, that's when the state office came in, removed that individual from their position immediately. And I believe legal consequences were threatened if the behavior did not stop. That individual was not removed, but at the end of the day, it was handled internally. And that individual is no longer associated with the program and has also coincidentally completely wiped themselves off the internet from what I have tried to track down. It gets bigger than that because I think the hardest part was during my research. There's the academic part of it, of what I am looking to research and what I know I can prove and what is empirical with my interviews. And then there is this whole other large web of secrets and hiding and lies and disgusting behavior that I cannot prove and is not my story to tell. So it stays separate from my research, but it does exist. And I can tell you it goes all the way to the national office. It starts in those internal problems, and then those people are not held accountable, and then they are promoted in their positions over time to these figurehead roles in national level offices when they should have been eliminated from that company entirely at that very first stage of something happening.
A thing that really caught me was Googling the phrase Teen Challenge controversy produces almost nothing. I have never seen a national org that has so effectively insulated itself from the controversy of its branches. And I say that because you can't look up the controversies of the national org, but every branch I looked into had controversies and groups talking about it.
Yeah.
Except the national one. Yep. Very fascinating. And they're quite frankly the only organization I've ever seen be that successful in shirking responsibility for their affiliate programs.
Yes.
It's remarkable how big and solid the wall the national org has put between itself and its chapter's behavior.
Well, it's had years of experience and it goes very high level, but it also goes into the individual interactions, like responsibility is constantly separated from that program. And with like the parents, for example, they're constantly told not to believe what we are saying to them about that program and how bad it is. They're constantly told that we are lying, that we just want to go home, that we want to do drugs again, whatever it may be. There is this energy of do not believe what these children are telling you from the very start. And so that forwards into don't trust what these adults who were once children going through this are telling you. And subsequently, we're on such a good holy mission, we can't possibly be doing anything wrong. We're on a mission for Jesus. And if we did do something wrong, then it's fine because Jesus will forgive us anyways. So it's this constant cycle of don't trust what these people are telling you, only trust what we're saying. We are doing God's work, and everything outside of that is of the world and lies, or just trying to break down this greater thing we're trying to do, and we're not going to let it, basically.
That also kind of leads me into, actually, before I jump onto this real quick, I want to ask one quick question, because you talked about the religious element of this. And it seems like, at least in my research, obviously Teen Challenge is Christian across the board, and what I would call pretty obviously a conservative evangelical kind of variant of Christianity. It also seems like, if you look into the broader troubled teen industry, that almost all of them are religious in some capacity. It's a spectrum of how religious, but I never found any that were completely removed and kind of wore secularism up front. Number one, do you know of any programs like this that are non-religious? And more importantly, I noticed you mentioned that even non-religious kids were going to these places and that those kids were experiencing the particular trauma of a violent conversion event on top of all this other stuff. Why in God's name would a non-religious, no pun intended, why in God's name would a non-religious family send a kid here?
I can tell you because I came from like that was me. That was like case in point, that was me. I think it's like a spectrum of like religious or spiritual, like mystical healing, like whatever. And I think it all like, almost always it seems to exist on that spectrum. And I don't think I've seen a single program that's like not on that spectrum in some way, shape, or form. See, Teen Challenge feels like the most extreme Christian end of that spectrum. I honestly don't even know what the comparison for the other side would be. For my family specifically, and my conditions going into that was my parents do have a spiritual journey and a spiritual life that is not involved with a formal church. And that is kind of how it was for me growing up. They were very much like, if you want to be in this religion, we want it to be your choice. I knew like the basic story of Noah and like maybe Jesus. When I went into that program, I had never owned a Bible. I'd actually spent more time in synagogues growing up because I went to summer camp in a synagogue when I was a kid, like a theater camp because I was a nerd. So, but like case in point, you know, I had spent more time in that kind of house of worship than a Christian one. So when my parents decided to send me, it was solely because, and we've had many conversations to try and kind of help both of us understand each other from like different sides. But like I've come to understand that it was feasibly like the only option that they saw. They felt that they did not have another option and they were worried that I was going to die, like not be here anymore. That's how scared they were for me. But the Christianity aspect was the biggest problem that they had with it. And it was something that they had a lot of contention with, but they felt like they had to make that choice anyways. And you know, I don't believe it's really my place to say whether or not I agree with that, but that's just how they feel about it. And so for me, coming into this space, never really having gone to church growing up, never having stepped foot in an evangelical church before, it was shocking the first couple of times that I saw somebody speak in tongues, pass out in the middle of a ceremony or worship or something. Half the time it felt funny because it was like how absurd it looked. And then the other half the time it was like scary because I'm like, what's wrong with this person?
Well, you're living in the middle of the woods with them. All of a sudden you're like, if you've never seen it before, it's very reasonable to like, is this person stable? Am I safe around this person?
Or like people touching you to like pray on you, like all of that I had never seen before. So like a lot of it, I had never really been exposed to any Christian messaging before. So this was really my first kind of experience with it. It's a mixture of like kind of the toxic aspects of Christianity that people already kind of well established and like talk about, but it's also this other half of it of like, we are a group of troubled kids who are there for very specific reasons, and the religion and that are not separate. For us, the messaging that I remember the most was like, you are an inherently broken person and your actions show that you're an inherently broken person, and Jesus is the only thing that can help that, but even that can't fix you, but maybe it can just make you feel better about it. For me, that was in the beginning, I think it was just something that I didn't even really know how to approach, because as an adult, I've come to recognize that I don't believe I had any genuine spiritual connection, even at the point in time where I was baptized. I still don't think that I had like a true, genuine spiritual connection with something otherworldly, but there were moments where I would like so badly want to feel it and want to feel all of these other things that people were saying that this was doing for them. I think that's just kind of when that mask starts to come on a little bit. And pretty soon after I left that program and I tried to go to church again, I realized very quickly how ingenuine it had felt the entire time and how out of place I felt in that church. Over the years afterwards, having to realize that churches will never be a place of comfort for me. That's how I articulate it now as an adult, especially with like people or family who don't really agree with or understand why I choose to not be religious as an adult. I fundamentally believe religion is supposed to be a place of comfort for you. And if that's what it can offer you, awesome. Like that's what it offers my parents, and I'm so happy that it can give that to them. For me, it's something else entirely. Like churches and religion will never offer comfort for me because of the way and the sharp contrast of what being entered into that was like. It will always feel out of place. It will always feel like an act. It will always feel like something that is putting me in a mental spot that I don't want to be in. And so the best choice that I've been able to make for myself as an adult is to separate myself from religion entirely. And that's the happiest I've been able to be. But the entire time that I was in that program, the like spiritual weight that you feel of disappointing your family, the actions that may or may not have led you there, even if you didn't really have any problems, but your family just didn't like that you want to kiss girls, you still feel disappointed in letting them down. And then you also feel disappointed in not connecting with the spiritual message that is the only thing that is being offered to you as any source of help and healing. That's why I think my research is so necessary, is because when you're a kid, you have no idea of all of these really complex, lifetime affecting processes are going on inside of you. You're just experiencing it. You're just trying to survive it. And then very few people as adults are able to step back and really recognize what that did to them. My goal is to just give an opportunity to the people who feel like they can articulate what that journey was like and be able to show it to a world that I don't think acknowledges it enough.
I think it's so fascinating because programs like this are oftentimes set up as ministries and as to spread the gospel. And then you end up in a situation where I would almost call it like a deconstruction factory. I can't envision anyone coming out of this with a good view of the faith that was being presented, arguably of Christian faith at all. And it makes you wonder, between all of the abuses and all of the inherent problems and all of just the raw dehumanization and the fact that kids are losing their faith rather than going in, it makes you wonder how these things last. And one of the reasons, shifting gears a little bit, that I want to talk about is because programs like Teen Challenge have very powerful friends. I say that to highlight that one thing you'll find on a lot of their websites is celebrity endorsements. And the endorsements you'll find are very interesting. These are people like Billy Graham, who I found giving a personal speech about how much he liked Teen Challenge.
Teen Challenge is a group of caring people who keep reaching out to our youth with the freeing love of Jesus Christ. I've believed in this ministry since its very beginning, and I continue to support it.
These are people like George W. Bush, who was on almost every list I found because it was his Office of Faith-Based Initiatives in the 2000s that propagated these kinds of programs.
The idea is to promote successful programs, to focus on whether or not these programs are successful, and if they are, encourage them. And one of the really successful programs in America is a program called Teen Challenge. Teen Challenge is a faith-based program. And his program is aimed, like many of the Teen Challenge programs, at helping young folks overcome addiction to drugs.
Interesting side note, this is just a theory of mine, but I also think that it's responsible for all of those stupid episodes of Maury and Jerry Springer we would see in the 2000s that sent kids to boot camp.
Oh, Dr. Phil, he's a whole other side of that web too. He feeds into it in a whole other way.
That's the thing with these places is you have no evidence. You don't have a phone there. They don't have cameras there. Like, there's no evidence of none of this. And obviously all the staff is in on it, so they're not going to snitch on each other. All you really have is the kids that are there. So a young lady, her name is Hannah, she recently spoke out because while she was there, she was sexually assaulted, and then when she reported that she was assaulted, she was punished by staff. Now, when I seen the punishment she was given, I knew, like, okay, I really have to say something. Like, I really have to have her back on this because I truly believe that they did that. So, Dr. Phil, I'm going to give you from now till April 5th to issue an apology, not only to me, but to Hannah and any other child that you sent to Turnabout or any other program like this. And if you don't, I'm gonna handle things my way.
Do you remember, I'm sure your channel covered it actually, Ruby Frankie?
Yes, we have been talking a lot about Ruby
She
Frankie.
sent her son to a military, or no, to a wilderness program for months early on in their channel. Like, yeah, that's exactly what it's there all the time. Like, it's in front of people's faces. They just don't recognize it.
And at the same time, I was seeing other names too, a couple other names that popped up on a few of the celebrity endorsement lists. Ronald Reagan was there every time George Bush was there. Hi, Missouri. John Ashcroft, former Bush Attorney General. James Dobson was on one of the lists, which I found remarkable because I'm like, do those denominations even agree with each other? This official support likewise extends to the government. I asked just a bit ago why a secular parent might send a kid there. Well, because thanks to the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives, these programs are sometimes utilized as formal diversionary programs. Police departments, juvenile offices will offer these as alternatives to other punishment through the court system and treat that as if it is fulfilling a court mandated need. And so how much of the success of these programs, the continued success despite having any reason to continue going on, is based on these friends in high places, this high level support? In your opinion, how much are they riding on that?
A lot. I think it's essential. I think there's two things that make Teen Challenge function as much of a well-oiled machine as it does. And I think that the criminal justice system is like one half of that. And the people that are funneled into it, either through judiciary decisions or through maybe even for my parents specifically, it was my therapist at the time. That's how they had first heard of Teen Challenge, is it was recommended to me. I obviously don't see that therapist anymore, but it was recommended to them by my therapist at the time. And that's the second like essential way that the program functions, is through social networks, either family or friends and trusted individuals seeing this like image that Teen Challenge puts out and telling other people about it, or the churches that they involve themselves with in the first place have wide, very expansive social networks that people will hear about this program, be like, oh, it's so good, it like does so much work. And then, you know, if something happens to them or somebody else's kid that they know, that's the first thing that they come to think of. So not only are they being fed into by the criminal justice system, but also by these kids like trusted adults around them too.
To your knowledge, how much record keeping is done of enrollee progress in these programs? If you today, as a former participant, just said, I want my records. We spent a lot of money.
I tried to ask. I was ghosted. I tried to ask.
Indication is that they don't take records, that they're not even there, most likely.
Yeah. Either that or they don't, because it's like a wall. It's so hard to see inside these places sometimes. From what I understand from the staff that I've interviewed as well, this was like just one reason why I felt it was essential, was because I wanted to understand that. From what I understand, not much is kept. What is kept isn't kept for very long, as you know, kids are constantly cycling through, and the organization process for it is just overall not well managed, from what I understand. Like, students would have meetings with like a staff member that was assigned as their mentor, and that mentor may take notes on a piece of paper and put it in a random binder and put that binder on a random shelf. So theoretically records are there, but how often do people actually pull those down and look at them, or let alone keep them? Like 5-10 years down the line, almost none. It exists in like so many different ways too. Like for me, it's a lack of record keeping in a lot of different areas. There's the behavioral aspect of it, of like, how do we even know that these kids are progressing the way you say they are?
Exactly.
It's also the contacts that they have with the outside world. For me, and the judiciary system, I had a court case that I was involved with that wasn't charges being held against me, but charges I was trying to bring against somebody else. And I was given basically no access to my victim's advocate at the time to speak to her about it. And the only access I was given was a single phone call monitored by an administrative staff in the same room. I actually had to call that victim's advocate like years later to even find out what happened in that case, because they never told me what happened in that court case. And then the other aspect of it too is the education aspect. I got somewhat lucky. It didn't impact my education too much, but I know a lot of people who the lack of record keeping vastly impacted their education. I know people who were not able to graduate high school, even though they were right on the cusp of being able to, because the records weren't kept that they had certain credits on their transcripts that they needed to graduate, or that they were supposed to be given GED tests and they weren't registered the way that they were supposed to. And so the results never actually were legitimized. Like all of these different pitfalls that not only like these kids are trying to get used to being adjusted back into school, but also some of these kids are finding out that they don't even like have any other options and that their life course is yet again being disrupted, but this time because of something that's out of their control, because somebody decided to not keep track of things.
Well, and I think it's interesting because, like you mentioned, they can ghost individual participants. They can just shut you out a lot of the time and just refuse to turn things over. They can't necessarily do that to the state, which means that the only protection they have is the one that they seem to be getting away with, which is not keeping records at all. If I didn't write it down, it didn't happen, and you can't get me in trouble. You can cite me for not properly record keeping it, but that's the best you're going to do. And again, this is used as a formal court-based diversionary program, despite keeping records that are lackluster in ways that should be obvious to the point of nausea. The other side of their support is the support for these programs is twofold. They have the big official support. They have the friends in high places, your George Bushes, your John Ashcrofts, your Ronald Reagans, people who will tout them and keep them going from a position of significant power.
Yeah.
But there is another side to it, which is that society itself right now truly doesn't see these programs for what they are. And I noticed that, number one, you would see a lot of blowback from people saying, well, kids got off drugs. Who cares, right? The kids did what they were supposed to, so it's successful, right? And likewise, that is backed up by something that really caught me off guard, which is, as I was researching, naturally, you look up Teen Challenge controversy, you look up program controversy. And they were there. There were things I found. And literally, it's like if you scroll down Google, that very quickly get drowned out by a chorus of testimonials. Former people like you who are kind of doing the opposite of this, going on camera, either when they were kids in the facility, which, ew, gross, take that down, or being brought back as adults to tout the program and its quote unquote services.
I've been granted so many different opportunities to be a better person because of this place.
This program works. I've been through other programs, and I truly believe that God was waiting for that time for me to finally surrender.
I came in pretty depressed, pretty low self-esteem, but now that I'm here, I found a lot more confidence. I'm a lot happier. I have a much more positive mindset about life overall.
I'd kind of hit my lowest point when I finally had accepted Christ. Like, this peace and this joy came over me, and I was still upset, but it was like I knew I could get through it.
Every once in a while we get those moments, and those moments encourage me a lot that like God is in this house and He has a plan and a purpose for every single one of us, whether we realize it or not.
And it's really nice because we can all come together and support each other and build each other up whenever one of us is at our low point, because it's really easy to get pulled into the negatives of, I don't want to be here, my family just abandoned me here. Like, no, they brought you here because they love you. You're here because someone loves you.
And so I say all of that because it can be very easy to go, it's getting them off drugs, it's doing this. These people are saying it was good and they went through it.
Yeah.
That can be hard to challenge.
Yeah.
From your perspective, as someone went through it, for people like us on the outside going, I know this is wrong, but it's hard to convey that.
Yeah.
How can we counter those narratives to cut through this, what is very clearly propaganda on this organization's part, saying we're so great, look at all of these individual anecdotal success stories. How can we as concerned citizens cut through the bullshit, quite frankly, and show this is a scam, this is a lie? How can we do that from your perspective?
If you just sit down and talk to people who are like me, who have been through these programs and are willing to talk about it. Like every single one of my participants who's a former student makes it a point to say, I'm doing well now, but that's not because of Teen Challenge. It's in spite of it. And it's the easiest way to just understand at the forefront why some of these kids may be doing good now as adults, but still hold this anger or this resentment towards this program. Even for me, it's been a really long journey because I go to a university I'm very, very proud to go to, that I worked very hard to get into. Even some of my own family have come at me with a narrative of, well, you say it's bad, but look how well you're doing now. And so there is a lot of mental process that we have to go to as former students, but also that I think outsiders have to go through, and understanding, it's survival. You don't have a choice. You can't roll over and just go to sleep and hope that you'll wake up back in your own bed. You have to get through that program one way or another. Whether or not you internalize anything is something entirely different. But when you are an adult leaving that program, for me, the second that I did start to do well for myself was when I fell in love with education and I started loving academics in a way I had never felt before. That and advocacy, as I'm doing right now, is what has helped me so and find my mission in life, has been that. But as well as that, there is this energy of, I am doing good for myself. It kind of ties back into like that lack of spirituality thing. It's like, I am happy because I am here and I am me, and I don't need to know if there's anything more out there. It doesn't serve me in this moment, so it's not important to me. That's kind of how I've come to look at Teen Challenge, is that like I will acknowledge that like I was in a situation that I needed to be physically removed from and put in another place. But what hurts me, and I think hurts a lot of other kids about what society says to me, to other people, is, yes, we made bad choices. We made, or maybe we didn't. Maybe our family just sent us there. Maybe we made multitudes of bad choices that led us to where we were. Does that mean that we get to have our humanity stripped away from us in a way that most 40-year-old adults will never be able to understand? Like, does that mean that I now have to live as a 23-year-old with like this traumatic weight that nobody in my life will be able to fully understand because I made bad choices when I was younger? Like, did I not deserve treatment and help instead of punishment and seclusion and isolation? These kids deserve better because we need to give them better. My parents had almost no options, and the option that they didn't have wasn't good, and I don't blame them for that. What I will blame them for is not understanding, and they haven't done this, thankfully, but like if they ever did try and tell me that what I feel does not matter because I had the audacity to try and do something good for myself as an adult, that I'm not allowed to hold those two things as separate but similar. Like, I can be angry and be hurt and not want other kids to be hurt in that way, but also I am proud of who I am now and have done a lot of work to get to where I am now. Would I be in this exact same spot without Teen Challenge? I can't say, but I don't live in any other world, do I? I live in this one, and I live with these consequences. So I have done what I can to make the best of them. And I think that's how a lot of other kids feel. There's this weird energy of like, I can't go back in time and change any of it. You do the best of what you can with what you have. We were children. We legally and physically could not make the decision to put ourselves into that facility, but we were there and we had to do what we could. I think that a lot of people just look at us and go, bad kid, go away, or you did this, you deserve that. And for me specifically, in like the academic spaces that I'm in, the social spaces that I'm in, when I do stuff like this, I get a lot of joy out of it because I know that I don't look like what most people think one of these former students will look like. I know that I don't look like somebody who was in one of these programs or went through some of the things that I went through. I don't articulate myself the way that people assume somebody like that would. And I have grown to use that very intentionally because that pinpoints the exact problem, Like we can grow, we can change, we can evolve. We deserve to be able to have that opportunity, but not with this like weight held on to us. Like, well, if you do good, then you have to accept that like this place isn't as bad as you insist it is, you know?
And as someone who has been in this space working with troubled kids in the community before, and I struggle with that language too. Anecdotally, earlier when talking to Jen about this, I referred to it by mistake as the tortured teen industry. And I'm going to kind of stick with that language, I think, because I think that might be what they're going for. And I also find it very interesting, especially looking at your research, just how much the social element mattered. And I think that there's something to be found there. It was the supportive teens and peers that caused this to be good. The adults, the structure, were a negative byproduct to be overcome. And so if you're looking to help a kid in a situation that would maybe lead them to one of these facilities, maybe look at finding them more positive influences in the community that is around them than ripping them out of it and giving control of them to adults who are at best misguided and who are at worst sometimes just flat out sadistic.
Exactly. Give kids the tools that they need to flourish in the communities that they're in. Don't strip them away from it. You know, it feels so common sense.
Well, and to that end, this is potentially the most important question I have. For people in your situation today, obviously we can't go back in time. We can't get kids out of there that were harmed. The harm of Teen Challenge exists in the world in a very broad scale. And chances are good, especially if you're watching this video, that you know someone who went through it, even if you don't know they went through it. Or you have someone to meet in your life who went through it. What can we do as people who didn't go through this? Obviously, I saw even in your research the conversation between survivors of these programs, and that's what you all are, survivors of these programs. You all know how to support each other, and that's a very unique thing that I don't feel an overwhelming need to get into.
Yeah.
What can we on the outside, people who haven't been through it as adults, do to support adults who have been through it and are struggling with that trauma? What can we do to be the most effective to folks like you or who were in that situation like you may have been?
I think everybody's trauma journey is very different. You know, like I have a lot of friends where I think sometimes the best thing I can do for them is just not bring it up at all. They struggle with it enough internally every day that they don't want to be reminded of it. But at the same time, it's so important that if somebody chooses, and this is with any traumatic scenario, you know, if somebody chooses to open up to you about it, listen and don't invalidate it and just let them go on tangent upon tangent. Because once those floodgates open, like it's so much. And some people really just want an outlet, especially if they've been going their entire adult life being invalidated in this experience. Sometimes when they talk about it, the only thing they want to hear is just, I believe you. And wow, that was fucked up. Tell me more. Like, it's the only thing that they want to hear, as strange as it sounds. And, you know, for the other part of it is like, even in my life, and this like story will kind of go into like one of the things I wanted to make sure was like mentioned because of how like awful but also like otherworldly it is. My best friend we're figuring out our Halloween costumes right now, and she wanted to reuse a costume she already had, which was a prisoner costume, and it was an orange prison jumpsuit. It was like a cropped cutesy one, whatever. And I told her like kind of very point blank over the phone, no, I don't want to wear that. I don't want to dress up as that for Halloween. And she was like, well, I don't get it. I don't think it's as big of a deal as you're making it out to be. And I was like, I think it is. And this is why she's my best friend. But she called me afterwards and she was like, I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. What triggers you is like what triggers you. We can figure out something else. Little things like that, like just showing support in those really small ways when things will inevitably come up, and just like not invalidating it. Like there are some times where like I have to just go on a drive, just remind myself that I am an adult, I have free will, and like nobody can tell me what to do anymore. And like that in itself is a kind of a trauma response. There are things that we just need to do to get through that day to day, and there will be times where it feels like every waking moment you're just existing back in that traumatized space. And so some people will need a lot of help being coaxed out of that space and being reminded of the present moment and just being grounded. And then some people just want a safe path to reflect back on that time that doesn't feel so hurtful.
Thank you for mentioning that, just because, and I agree with you, validation is a central theme of it. At the same time, we also want to be careful. We don't want to validate what they told you about yourself. And I want to highlight that the successful adult you are today was that kid who deserved more love and attention and respect back then. Those are the same person, and that's never that right to love and respect has never changed. You have it now, and you had it back then, even though Teen Challenge didn't live up to it.
Exactly.
And so, even without the abuses, even if things go exactly how they're supposed to, the core of the Teen Challenge model is dehumanization of the teenager. It really is. And it's something our society has a problem with on a broad scale, but perhaps nowhere more obviously or concerningly than at Teen Challenge. There is no way to do this without dehumanizing the participants. It's not possible to enact their model without it. And so thank you so much, Lynn, for taking the time to sit down and chat with us.
Good. But thank you so much just for this opportunity. Like I said, I've been a fan of you guys for quite a long time. So it's kind of an amazing moment just for me as a fan of the challenge, just being like, wow, this is really cool. But also, just being able to have the opportunity to kind of tell this story is something that's really important to me. So I am always really grateful when I get a new opportunity to talk about it.
Well, thank you so much. It's our pleasure. Part of the reason we love doing what we do is because we get to signal boost important stories like yours. And so that signal boosting doesn't work without you all. We've been told today what we can do to support folks who went this. And now, more than anything else, you can shit talk Teen Challenge to everyone you know, because it deserves it and because that's how we take it down as a system. So, Lynn, thank you again for taking the time, and we will see you all next time. One of the things about these interviews, Lynn's actually a student, has somewhere to go. I have one more question, if that's okay.
And I have two things I wanted to tell you about afterwards, and then
So last questions.
My sociology of trauma professor, so I feel like if anybody understand why,
I will send an email. I will send you an email.
Understand why I may or may not be a little bit late to lecture today.
Give me their email and I will tell them it was my fault.
If anything, she'll probably just want the YouTube link in a month or something.
There we go. Well, and to that end,